Hello, this is Lance Clark. This is my case study for AEP 855 Educational Leadership for Module 9. The case study starts out with two junior high students, James and David, being called to the principal's office due to suspicious activity that was observed by a fifth period teacher. Originally, James was called down to the office for being tardy to a class. However, once the instructor saw that James and David had an encounter where something seemed to have been passed, the teacher thought that there was possibly drugs involved, and so they informed the assistant principal, and the assistant principal called them down. In calling them down, he also invited a staff member, a school police officer to come into the office with them. And upon questioning the teens, David admitted that he had that he was holding brass knuckles. And when the officer arrested him, James then admitted that he had threatened David and that the brass knuckles were actually his. The police officer actually arrested both of them. And when the principal called the students' mothers, both mothers reacted a little bit differently. James's mother was not necessarily surprised and told the principal to simply let him sit in detention to learn a lesson, while David's mother was distraught and angry and asked why her son was being held, even though the other student had admitted guilt. David returned to class after a week. James was still at the detention center, and Principal Inman chose not to follow up on an expulsion, which was district policy for David. And upon giving the information not giving the information, the director of secondary education insisted that the paperwork be completed and that a reprimand would be placed in the assistant principal's permanent record if he did not follow through with the paperwork. As far as legality and ethics, there was no physical harm that happened to any participants. However, David's reputation and character would be negatively affected due to any illegal nature of possessing the brass knuckles. For contravention, technically, yes, David did break the law by possessing the brass knuckles, so the officer did have cause to arrest him. However, once David was found innocent because James told the officer and the principal that the brass knuckles were actually his, the arresting officer did not let David go. He simply arrested both of them. I did not feel like the action of the officer was discriminatory in arresting both students, since the school guidelines and state laws pertaining to the brass knuckles show that they were actually illegal to possess. Ethically, I'm not sure that arresting both students for possession of a single item is what should have happened. If you're going to specifically go by the law, you would arrest David. However, since James was taking credit for the brass knuckles and admitting to threatening David, I felt that he probably should have been the one to be arrested and not David. To sum this up, I said that laws are written to be cut and dried on a single plane. However, circumstances of each situation are multifaceted and may require further investigation to determine an appropriate punishment for individual classes. The idea of equity versus equality. The people involved were the assistant principal, Richard Inman, the 15-year-old student, James, the junior high honor student, David Ramos, the school police officer, the fifth period teacher who saw the suspicious activity, both mothers of the students, the director of secondary education, and then obviously other administrative staff from the district. As far as the things that went on, James was asked to go to the office for tardies. He was seen giving something to David. Since the principal called them down and brought a police officer in with them, the police officer was there to arrest Ramos when he admitted that he had the brass knuckles on him. Once James admitted he coerced David into holding the brass knuckles, the officer arrested both of them instead of just the one. Based on the school's policy, both students are supposed to be expelled, but because the principal did not feel that David should be expelled, he did not fill out paperwork. Thus, the director of secondary ed requested that either he write up Ramos for expulsion or that he would be subject to reprimand in his record. As far as background, the location is an urban junior high school with approximately 900 students. It has a first-year assistant principal. One can conclude from the reading that the free and reduced lunch numbers are probably high, with poverty and gangs an issue amongst possibly students in the neighborhood that the school was in. They did not mention race for any of the parties, so you don't really know what race any of the subjects were. The first boy, James, obviously had a troubled history, while the second boy, David, was an honor student with no background of trouble. For the situation, the stakeholders involved were not very many. You had David, whose record and reputation as an honor student is threatened because of the illegally possessing the concealed weapons. You had James, who was a little bit more at risk because of his history, and the punishment could possibly be more severe with him. You had the principal, whose choice of either completing or not completing the expulsion paperwork could possibly endanger his record by having the reprimand put into his file. If he does write up the paperwork to have David expelled, it could be detrimental to David's future. Finally, you're looking at both families of the students, because the negative impact that it has on the students could possibly carry over to their their relationship with their families. Since no one was physically harmed, even though the event was illegal, there was not a wide range of implications with any other stakeholders. And so you want to make sure and handle the situation as confidentially as possible. All of the people involved were notified. They were interviewed. They voiced their concerns and opinions. I'm not sure if either family, the principal, or the schools were in contact with legal counsel for any sort of recommendations as far as what they need to do or what they should do. I would like to find out if there is flexibility in the policy at all. Even though I know it's a zero tolerance school, something that would allow for David to have a reduced punishment, or possibly to make some amendments to the policy. I definitely know what I would like to do as a decision. However, I would definitely need more information to come to a final decision. The first option is obviously to make no decision, let the situation carry out, and it would mean full punishment for both David and James, no reprimand for Principal Inman. Second option would be very comprehensive, where you could bring about full punishment for both students, and possibly resulting in criminal charges as well. Option 3, more of a liberal decision, would be to advocate for a reduction in punishment for James, and then also with David having served a week-long suspension, have no other punishment other than that suspension. In that situation, obviously, Principal Inman would probably get a reprimand, and it would be put into his file. Some other options would be a different combination of punishments or retribution from the students. This could maybe result in reduced number of days of expulsion for David, community service hours, detention hours in lieu of expulsion. For James, on the other hand, his punishment would probably be more difficult to alter, just for the simple fact that he did bring illegal items to school and coerce David into taking possession of them. So his situation is not necessarily cut and dried like David's could be. However, you could still advocate for a lower punishment for James. The final option would definitely be to pursue legal counsel and have the entire situation investigated. You would definitely have to review the policy to make sure that it is completely legal. I would assume that it would be, but at the same time, you would definitely want to check it out to possibly help out the students any way you can. If you go with no decision, the pro is definitely the situation is quickly resolved. There's no reprimand for the principal's record. All students serve their time and life goes on. The con for this would definitely be David's life affected negatively, reputation and character would be judged, and James's progress over the last few months would be negated, and his future would be in question as well. For the conservative decision, an example would be made of both students, a message sent to the student body that no one is above the law, and the policies will be followed completely. Unfortunately, because of this, both the students' futures would be affected negatively, leading to possibly more problems, and then all of the hard work that Principal Inman has done to gain the trust of the student body would definitely be affected to the point where maybe other students would have issues arise that are in the same type of situations. With a liberal decision, David's reputation and character would be minimally affected. He could continue on as a model student. James will have served some expulsion time, however, may be allowed to return to school sooner than the 45 days and possibly hope that he would continue working on the good run of behavior that he had before the incident. With this, Principal Inman's trust with the student body would probably be strengthened as someone who would be able to be willing to stand up for the students. The cons with this one, Principal Inman would be reprimanded and face future backlash from the district. A message of leniency would be sent to the student body, meaning that they might look at that as a way to get away with some other situations, and it would set precedents for a lack of punishment in the future. Some of the other options, pros and cons, would definitely fall into a combination of those listed above. Based on the harshness or lack of punishment, the student body would definitely take that into account. It would positively or negatively affect the future behavior and trust. In addition, James, David's, and Principal Inman's futures would also be dependent upon the outcome of the situation. And then finally, the district policy may come into question, and changes could possibly be made based on any findings from an investigation. In analyzing all the options, I will attempt to decide as ethically as possible to advocate for all parties involved. When determining punishment is definitely not a black and white situation and should not be treated as one. With the possibility of repercussions on myself, I must maintain integrity and make my decision on what is equitable, ethical, and just for everybody involved. After reflecting on the situation, the ethical options, the possible implications and effects on stakeholders, my decision would definitely be not to write David Ramos up for the expulsion. Even though I would be reprimanded by the district for not following policy, I would be more concerned with David's future over my own. In addition, I would raise question of the policy equity over policy equality. Based on the circumstances, James and David do not deserve the same punishment. Legally, James would have to be punished for possessing the brass knuckles. However, David does not deserve the legal action that the policy would suggest. Also, I would advocate for James to enter a program that could help him to possibly change his path, continue positive behaviors, and hopefully be a member of society that would be successful. David was definitely a victim of James's threats and also the district's zero tolerance policy. I would definitely ask the district to look at the policy and reevaluate how they determine the punishment. And obviously, as I mentioned before, I am more than willing to accept any reprimand if it means a beneficial outcome for any student that would ever be involved in something like this. Thank you very much for watching, and have a great day.